Hi everyone, in today's video I want to talk about something that often comes up when talking about the latest entries in the Phantasy Star series, and that is whether the current direction for gear advancement is a benefit or a detriment to the games. So first let's clear up exactly what I mean by that. In PSO2 New Genesis, and to a lesser extent in PSO2 Classic, weapons tend to appear in what is referred to as a weapon series. What this means is that a new series will be released which usually contains a weapon for every single weapon type. If we look at the current state of PSO2 NGS at the time of recording, the Acrocelio and 12 weapons are an example of this. Every weapon type has an Acrocelio, which will normally have the same weapon potential across the board. There are exceptions to this, such as the Relic or Melic series, which actually have differing weapon appearances and weapon potentials, but these are a rare occurrence. So if we look back at the earlier games, the approach was much different. Take PSO for example. In PSO, most of the rare gear is unique and tends to fulfill specific roles. For example, if you want a multi-target weapon that has a damage boosting special, you could go for something like a Zanba with Berserk, a 3084 Flowers with Spirit, or many other options like Yunchang. Want a way for forces to be able to cut enemy HP when the enemy technique resistances are high? You could use things like Slicer of Fanatic or Bringer's Rifle to achieve that. It's very rare in PSO to see weapons come as a series. I guess the nearest thing to that in PSO would be something like the red weapons, but they 1. Don't cover all weapon types, and 2. Have differing special attacks between them. So why did the games change how they approach rare weapons? I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that PSO2 and NGS are both live service games which continually evolve and add content over time. Due to this, there isn't really an endgame in terms of equipment, as the perceived endgame actually shifts with every time there's a content update. For example, for a long time in NGS we used the Verschmel's weapon series. This has then been phased out over time by weapon series such as Wingard, the Exelio upgrade series, and 12. At the time of recording, the Acrocelio weapons are probably the best in slot for most weapons, but this again will eventually change again once stronger weapons are introduced. I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to happen because as the level cap increases, so too do the enemies. It's a logical conclusion therefore that as we level up and more content is added to the game, that we also level up our gear. So with the older games like PSO, it was largely a case of what you see is what you get. While the game did get download quests, there was never really a shifting endgame because the content was always available, with the sole exception being something like Global Blue Burst at launch, which got ultimate difficulty added later on. Because of how PSO was handled, you knew what the best gear was for your class and you'd generally aim towards it as an endgame goal. For example, as a Force player in PSO, it's common knowledge that the Psycho 1 is one of the best weapons in the game, due to its huge technique damage boosts and TP cost reductions. It's also one of the hardest items in the game to find, so it would give you a long-term goal in looking for one. I kind of feel that PSO had to use this method because once you hit the endgame in PSO and have the best gear, a lot of people will lose the motivation to keep playing. It's a case of, okay, so I have the best items, now what? Not everyone will feel this way, but it's definitely an issue for some PSO players. In that regard, maybe it's a good thing that some items were so impossibly hard to get. I kind of see this as a carrot on a stick approach, trying to hunt things that are so difficult that they actually keep you playing the game. That said, this isn't the case for all weapons, and a lot of gear in PSO is actually very reasonable to farm for as well. With PSO2 and NGS, I feel that you don't really need to worry about this. You can just jump in, see what the current best in slot is, and then farm for it. Then whenever there's a new series added, you can just pivot over to that. If PSO is the carrot on a stick approach, then I feel that PSO2 and NGS is more like a breadcrumb trail, where you incrementally upgrade, then an update happens and you move towards the next breadcrumb. For the live service games, I'm not really sure how SEGA could have done this differently. One area I will criticise the later games for though is in the variety of rare gear, or rather the lack of rare variety. Because of how the series system works, weapons almost always have the exact same potentials regardless of weapon type, and because weapon series are dropped incrementally, you tend to find that everyone uses the exact same gear. Now, yes, the augment systems in these games do let you customise your playstyle to an extent, and the weapon camo system does allow you to have your weapon look exactly as you want to, but there's no taking away from the fact that, particularly in NGS, there is a real lack of variety in gear choices. In the older games, there was definitely gear that people would gravitate towards much more often, like Excalibur and Blue Burst, and ranger weapons like Frozen Shooter are essentially staples in those games. But outside of these, your options were much more open-ended. So because of these differences, maybe it's no surprise that the core farming has changed too. In PSO, the rare item grind is basically all about finding the item itself. grinding the same quests over and over again to get that enemy to finally drop that red box. But in NGS, the grind isn't really for the weapon as such, it's more about grinding for the capsules to add the best abilities to the weapon, or farming for fixes that you can then transfer over. I feel that the gear grind does still exist, but it's just moved on to something a little different. So which method is better? Honestly, I believe that this is something that will probably differ from player to player. For me, I love the PSO method of farming for the rarest items, for that rush of dopamine, just to be immediately replaced with regret when you realise that it's another photon drop. However, I can totally understand why the series system was implemented for the live service games. Having said that, I would love it if SEGA would occasionally introduce some more individualised weapons. Relic and Melek series, I believe, were a small sign of them willing to do this because they did have different weapon models and different potentials, but it would be cool to see more of this individuality. Of course, this does need to be shared across all the different weapon types so that no one misses out, but I do feel that relying almost solely on identical weapon series does get a little dull at times. In conclusion, I think that the method that PSO used to keep players hunting rares was the method that probably worked best for the game at the time. Because of how radically different PSO2 and NGS are though, maybe it's no surprise that things had to change. Whether you think that's for the better or worse is entirely up to your own decision. It's going to depend on what your focus is. If you're someone who's very sort of goal-minded, maybe PSO's system is better for you because you can set a goal and work towards it. You can still do that in PSO2 and NGS, but because the game changes every few updates, your goals will keep adjusting over time as well. So ultimately, I think it's going to end up with just which you prefer. And I don't think there is necessarily a better system. And I think that SEGA have probably gone with the best system they could for the types of games that PSO is and the type of game that PSO2 NGS is. So with that, I think in conclusion, I think SEGA are probably doing about the best they can. It'd maybe just be nice to see a little bit more individuality in some of the weapons that are added in NGS. So with that, I think we'll wrap up that video there. If you do have any comments or anything, I'd like to hear your guys' view on this as well, from PSO players and right up to NGS players as well, because I feel that people's view on this might differ quite drastically depending on which game you started with. So I'm interested to hear your guys' opinions on this. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider either leaving a like or subscribing on YouTube. You can also join as a member if you want to. I do typically a member's first video every Tuesday, which goes live to non-members a week later. So if you want to be one of the first ones to see that, feel free to join as a member. You can also follow me also over on Twitch. I have an X and a Bluesky, which are both SectionSkyly as well. And I do have a Discord channel that you can join, which I'll leave a link to in the description as well. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this look back at how PSO and PSO2 do their rare hunting a little bit differently. And I'll see you guys in the next video.